The desert doesn't forgive mistakes, and Cade Mercer had just made his worst one yet. He stood over the dying boy, barely 16, arrows still embedded in his chest, wearing the bone talismans of the Ash River clan. Every instinct screamed to finish it. The clans killed settlers on sight. Settlers returned the favor. 20 years of bloodshed had taught the Red Basin one lesson. Mercy was suicide. But something in the kid's eyes held him frozen. One choice, 1 second. The kind that divides a man's life into before and after. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay till the end. The blood was still warm when Cade found him. 3 miles south of Hawks Bend, where the scrub brush gave way to broken stone and the wind carried the smell of gunpowder, Cade Mercer tracked the aftermath of another skirmish. He wasn't looking for survivors. Nobody survived out here. The frontier didn't work that way. But the boy wasn't dead yet. He lay sprawled beneath a juniper tree, chest rising in shallow gasps. 2 arrows punched clean through his ribs. 16, maybe 17. Dark hair matted with dust and blood. And around his neck, the unmistakable carved bone and sinew markings of the Ash River people. Cade's hand went to his rifle before conscious thought caught up. 20 years. 20 years of war between the settlements and the mountain clans. 20 years of ambushes, burned homesteads, bodies left to rot under the desert sun. The clans didn't take prisoners. Neither did the settlers. It was the one thing both sides agreed on. The boy's eyes opened, dark, feverish, but sharp enough to see the rifle. He didn't beg, didn't speak, just watched Cade with the kind of stillness that came from already being dead inside. Cade should have pulled the trigger. Instead, he knelt down. "Don't move," he said quietly. The boy's breath hitched, surprise maybe, or the beginning of a scream he was too weak to make. Cade pressed a hand to the wound, feeling hot blood pulse against his palm. "I said don't move." He worked fast, snapped the arrow shafts, packed the wounds with strips torn from his own shirt, wrapped them tight enough to hold. The boy never made a sound, though his fingers dug into the sand hard enough to leave marks. When it was done, Cade sat back on his heels, breathing hard. "You got a name?" The boy stared at him. "Didn't think so." Cade wiped his hands on his pants, leaving rust-colored streaks. "Can you ride?" A slow blink, then barely audible. "Why?" It was a fair question. Cade didn't have an answer that made sense, so he didn't give one. "There's a canyon 2 miles east. Spring water, shade, defensible. You stay there 3 days, keep the wounds clean, you might live." He stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "After that, you're on your own." He started walking. "Settler." Cade stopped. The boy had pushed himself up on one elbow, face gray with pain but eyes burning. "Why?" Cade looked back at him, this kid who should have been dead, who would probably die anyway, who represented everything Cade had spent 2 decades hating. "Because I'm tired," he said finally, "and I'm done killing children." He left before the boy could respond. 3 days later, Cade returned to the canyon. He told himself it was just to check, make sure the body was dealt with properly, not left to draw scavengers or worse. That was all. But when he crested the ridge and looked down, the boy was alive. Sitting up, even. Pale and shaking, but awake. He'd made a small fire somehow and was roasting a lizard on a stick. When he saw Cade, his hand went to a knife at his belt. A blade too fine for frontier work, wrapped in leather and etched with symbols Cade couldn't read. "Easy," Cade said, raising his hands. "Just checking you didn't die on me." The boy's grip didn't loosen. "You came back." "Looks like." They stared at each other across 20 feet of sun-blasted rock. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the distant cry of a hawk. Somewhere to the north, thunder rumbled. A storm building over the mountains where the Ash River clans made their strongholds, where no settler had ridden in living memory and come back to tell about it. "My name," the boy said slowly, "is Kael." Cade nodded. "Cade Mercer." "I know. The soldiers talk about you, the prospector who walks alone. They say you are half ghost. They say a lot of things. They say you killed 17 men in the Red Basin Wars." Cade's jaw tightened. 15. "And I didn't ask their names." Kael studied him with unsettling intensity, like he was looking at something Cade couldn't see. Finally, he lowered the knife. My people will want to know why you did this. Your people going to ask before they put an arrow in me? A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed Kael's face. Probably not. Then I guess we'll find out together. It wasn't a decision Cade remembered making, but 3 hours later, he was riding north with a half-dead clan warrior at his back, heading straight into the mountains that had swallowed better men whole. The Ash River Stronghold appeared like a wound in the mountainside. Cade saw it from 2 miles out, carved into the living rock, half hidden by waterfalls and ancient pines, defended by cliffs that would shred any army stupid enough to try a frontal assault. Even from a distance, he could feel eyes on him. Sentries, archers, probably a dozen ways to die before he got within shouting distance. Kael had barely spoken since they'd started riding. Now he straightened in the saddle despite the pain it must have caused. They will stop us soon, he said quietly. When they do, let me speak first. Do not reach for your weapons. Do not run. Running is death. Comforting. I'm trying to keep you alive, Mercer. Funny way of showing gratitude. But before Kael could answer, the trail ahead exploded with movement. They came from everywhere at once. 10, 15 warriors materializing from rocks and trees like they'd been part of the landscape itself. All armed. All aimed at Cade. One of them, a woman with a scar bisecting her face and eyes like flint, stepped forward. Kael. Her voice was hard. We thought you dead. Nearly was. Kael dismounted, swaying but staying upright through sheer will. This man saved my life. The woman's gaze shifted to Cade. Then this man is a fool. Perhaps, but he is here under my protection. Your protection? Another warrior, older with gray streaking his braids, spat into the dust. You are barely old enough to hunt alone, boy. You cannot offer protection to a settler. The word landed like a curse. Cade kept his hands visible, his breathing steady. Every muscle in his body screamed to run, but Kael had been right. Running was death. So he sat still and let them see him. Let them see he wasn't reaching for the rifle, wasn't making threats. Just waiting. Take it to Talon, the scarred woman said finally. Let him decide. They stripped Cade's weapons with brutal efficiency, rifle, pistol, knife, even the small blade he kept in his boot, bound his wrists with cord that bit into skin. One of them shoved him forward hard enough to make him stumble. Kael moved to intervene, but the older warrior caught his arm. You want him to live? Then he walks like what he is, a prisoner. The stronghold interior was larger than Cade had imagined, a warren of stone chambers and passages carved over generations, lit by firelight and ventilation shafts that opened to the sky. Everywhere he looked, he saw people, families, children playing with carved wooden animals, women weaving cloth, men repairing weapons, a whole civilization hidden in the rock. They took him to the deepest chamber. The man waiting there didn't look like what Cade expected. No war paint, no elaborate dress, just lean muscle and weathered skin, hair shot through with silver, eyes that missed nothing. He sat on a simple stone seat surrounded by a council of elders, and when Cade was shoved to his knees in front of him, those eyes fixed on him with the weight of a rifle barrel. Talon Var, Kael said, bowing his head. This is Cade Mercer. He found me dying. He could have finished me. Instead, he saved my life. Talon's expression didn't change. Why? The question wasn't directed at Kael. Cade met Talon's gaze. I was tired of killing. Tired. Talon's voice was soft, dangerous. 15 of my people are dead because you were tired. I didn't say it made sense. Someone behind Cade struck him across the back of the head, not hard enough to drop him, but hard enough to make the point. The chamber spun. Talon raised a hand. The violence stopped. You know what we do to settlers who enter our lands, Talon said. It wasn't a question. I can guess. Then you are either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. A ripple of movement through the council, shock, maybe, that he'd dare speak so freely. But Cade had nothing left to lose. He'd crossed the line the moment he'd let Kael live. Might as well finish the ride. Talon stood, walked down from the stone seat, until he stood directly in front of Cade, close enough that Cade could see the scars on his hands, the silver threads in his hair, the absolute absence of mercy in his face. "My son is alive because of you," Talon said quietly. The chamber went dead silent. Cade's mind stuttered. "Son?" Talon didn't look at Kyle, didn't need to. "If you had let him die, I would have burned every settlement between here and the Red Basin. Every man, woman, and child. I would have salted the earth and left nothing but ghosts. But I didn't." "No." Something flickered in Talon's eyes, too fast to read, too complex to name. "You didn't." He turned away, walked back to the stone seat, sat down. "You will stay here tonight," Talon said. "Tomorrow we will talk. And you will tell me why a man who has killed 15 of my people now wants to save them." They put him in a small chamber carved into the rock, more cell than room, but with a pallet and blanket, a cup of water. The door was wooden, barred from the outside. Cade sat with his back against the wall and tried to process what had just happened. Kyle was Talon's son, the boy he'd saved, on a whim, because he was too tired and too broken to pull a trigger one more time. That boy was the heir to the most feared war leader on the frontier. Cade started laughing. It was either that or scream. He was still laughing when the door opened. Kyle stood in the doorway, carrying a tray with food, dried meat, flatbread, something that looked like berries. He set it down carefully, then sat across from Cade, back against the opposite wall. "You didn't tell me," Cade said. "Would it have changed anything?" Cade thought about it. "No." Then it did not matter. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, Cade could hear voices, footsteps, the normal sounds of a community settling in for the night. It was so ordinary it hurt. "Why did you really do it?" Kyle asked. "And do not tell me you were tired. My father may have accepted that. I do not." Cade stared at the stone ceiling. "How did you explain something you didn't fully understand yourself?" "I had a brother," he said finally. "Younger. Died when he was about your age. Took an arrow in a raid, bled out before we could get him home." He paused. "When I saw you lying there for just a second, I saw him. And I thought, what if someone had helped him? What if someone had cared enough to stop?" Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "I am sorry," he said. "Yeah, me too. My father will want to kill you, you know. The council will demand it. You are a symbol of everything we have fought against." "I figured. But you came anyway. Seemed like the thing to do." Mikhail smiled. A real smile this time, tired and sad and somehow hopeful. "You're either very brave or very stupid." Someone already said that. It is still true. When Kyle left, he didn't bar the door. Cade could have run, should have run, but he stayed on the pallet, staring at nothing, and for the first time in years felt something other than emptiness. Morning came with the sound of rain. Cade woke to water drumming on stone, the smell of wet earth filtering through ventilation shafts. Someone had left fresh clothes outside his door, simple but clean, made from woven plant fiber. His own clothes were gone, probably burned. When he emerged, 2 warriors were waiting to escort him. The council chamber was full. Talon sat in the same stone seat, but now the room was packed with elders, warriors, people Cade didn't recognize, all watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hatred. Talon gestured to a spot in the center of the room. "Sit." Cade sat. "I have spent the night speaking with my council," Talon said. "They have reminded me of many things. The settlements we have lost, the children taken, the promises broken by your people again and again." His voice was level, but the weight behind it could have crushed stone. "They have reminded me that mercy is weakness, that to spare you is to invite more death." Cade said nothing. There was nothing to say. "But I have also considered your actions." Talon leaned forward. "You had every reason to kill my son. Instead, you saved him. You brought him home. You walked into our stronghold knowing you would likely die." He paused. "That is not the action of an enemy. That is the action of something else." "What?" Cade asked. "I do not know yet. That is what troubles me." An elder stood, ancient, stooped, with eyes clouded by age but sharp as broken glass. "He is a trick. the old man said in accented English. Settlers do not change. They take and take until nothing remains. Some do, Talon agreed, but not all. You would risk our people on a guess? I would risk nothing, but I would test something. Talon's gaze never left Cade. You say you are tired of killing. Prove it. How? Go back to your settlements. Tell them we do not want war. Tell them that if they allow our hunters safe passage through the eastern valleys, we will allow their mail riders through our lands unmolested. Talon's voice hardened. 1 month. One honest agreement. If it holds, perhaps more is possible. If it breaks, we will know where we stand. The chamber erupted, half the council shouting in their own language, the other half glaring at Talon like he'd suggested surrender. But Talon didn't move, didn't flinch. He waited until the noise died down, then spoke again. Mercer saved my son. That debt must be honored. But more than that, I am tired too. Tired of watching our children grow up knowing only war. Tired of burning bodies. Tired of the endless, pointless cycle. He stood. If there is even the smallest chance for something different, I will take it. Silence. Then Kael, standing at the edge of the room, stepped forward. I will go with him. Every head turned. No, Talon said. Father, no. If Mercer goes alone, the settlers will kill him on sight. You know this. Kael's voice was steady, but Cade could hear the fear underneath. He needs someone who can speak for us, someone they cannot ignore. And if they kill you instead, then we will know the answer. The look that passed between them was complex. Love, anger, pride, terror, all mixed together. Finally, Talon closed his eyes. You are your mother's son, he said quietly. Brave and foolish in equal measure. I learned from the best. When Talon looked at Cade again, something had changed in his face. You will protect him. If he dies, I will carve your people from this land like rot from wood. Do you understand? Yes. Swear it. Cade stood, met Talon's eyes. I swear. They left at dawn, Cade and Kael, riding down the mountain through rain that turned the trails to mud. Neither spoke much. There wasn't much to say. They both knew how insane this was, how easily it could all go wrong. But halfway down, Kael reined in his horse. Mercer. Cade stopped. Thank you. For what? For being stupid enough to try. Cade smiled despite himself. Yeah, well, old habits. They rode on. Behind them, hidden in the mist and stone, the Ash River Stronghold watched them go. And ahead, in the settlements where fear and hatred ran deeper than any river, Hawks Bend waited. The town looked the same as always, dusty, weather-beaten, clinging to existence through sheer stubbornness. But when Cade and Kael rode down the main street, every head turned. Conversation stopped. Hands went to weapons. Cade pulled up in front of the trading post. Dismounted. Kael stayed in the saddle, very aware of the rifles suddenly aimed his direction. Easy, Cade said loudly. He's with me. That's a clan warrior, someone shouted. I know what he is. Then you know what we do to them. A crowd was forming now, angry, scared, looking for an excuse. Cade recognized most of them. People he'd traded with, drunk with, survived alongside. Now they stared at him like a stranger. Marshal Tobias Quinn pushed through the crowd. 50 years old, hard as coffin nails, with a star pinned to his vest and a shotgun in his hands. He looked at Kael, then at Cade. The hell is this, Mercer? This, Cade said carefully, is a chance. A chance for what? To get us all killed? To stop killing, if we can. Quinn's jaw worked. You've lost your mind. Maybe, but I need you to listen anyway. It took an hour of talking, arguing, explaining while Kael sat silent on his horse and the crowd grew larger and more hostile. Cade laid it out, the offer, the terms, the fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could try something other than endless slaughter. Most of them wanted to shoot Kael where he sat, but Quinn, damn him, actually listened. 1 month, he said finally. Safe passage for mail riders. That's what you're saying. That's what Talon offered. And if it's a trap, then we're no worse off than we are now. Quinn looked at Kyle. You speak English, boy. Yes. Your father really mean this? Kyle met his gaze without flinching. My father does not lie. If he says the riders will pass safely, they will pass safely. And if one of your hotheads decides different, then my father will deal with them. The crowd murmured. Quinn's grip on the shotgun didn't loosen. I don't like this, he said. Don't trust it. Don't trust you. He pointed at Kyle. And I sure as hell don't trust him. I'm not asking you to trust anyone, Cade said. I'm asking you to try. Just once. Just to see. The silence stretched out. Then Quinn lowered the shotgun. 1 month, he said. 1 rider, weekly run to Copper Ridge and back. If he comes back alive and unmolested, we'll talk more. If he doesn't, you'll have your war anyway, Cade finished. Nothing lost. Everything lost, Quinn corrected. But maybe you're right. Maybe we're already there. The first male rider left 3 days later. His name was Samuel Frost, young, quick, with more courage than sense. He carried letters, packages, news from the settlements to the mining camps up north. Normally, he went the long way around, adding 2 days to the journey to avoid clan territory. This time, he rode straight through. Cade and Kyle waited at the edge of town, watching him disappear into the distance. If he dies, Kyle said quietly, this ends. I know. They will blame my people. I know that too. And if he lives, Cade looked at him, then maybe we get to see what comes next. 4 days later, Samuel Frost rode back into Hawks Bend, alive, unharmed, carrying the return mail and a story about clan warriors who'd watched him pass, weapons lowered, without a single arrow fired. The crowd that gathered was smaller this time, more cautious. But when Samuel told his story, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in the wall. Marshal Quinn found Cade at the saloon that night. It worked, he said. Just that. No elaboration. Once, Cade replied, doesn't mean it'll work again. No, but it's a start. Quinn ordered whiskey. They drank in silence while the piano played and men talked in low voices about things that had seemed impossible a week ago. You know what you've done, don't you? Quinn said finally. Started something I can't finish? Made people think it's possible. Quinn's eyes were tired. That's more dangerous than war, Mercer. Hope gets people killed. So does giving up. Yeah. Quinn drained his glass. Yeah, it does. Outside, the rain had stopped. Stars appeared in gaps between clouds. And somewhere to the north, in the mountains where the Ash River people made their home, Talonvar stood watching the same sky, waiting to see if one small promise could grow into something larger. If mercy, offered once in the desert dust, could become something more than a mistake. If 2 peoples who had bled each other for 20 years could find a different way. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the first step toward not being enemies. And for now, that was enough. The second week brought challenges neither Cade nor Kyle had anticipated. Samuel Frost's successful passage had cracked the door open, but getting anyone else to walk through it was another matter entirely. The settlements buzzed with rumor and suspicion. In the Red Basin saloon, old-timers insisted it was a trap. The Talon was simply waiting until enough settlers trusted the roots before springing an ambush that would dwarf anything the frontier had seen. At the general store, women whispered that Cade had been bewitched, that the clans had some kind of dark magic that made men forget their murdered kin. Kyle felt it worse. He'd moved into a room above the livery stable, and every morning found fresh threats carved into the door. Twice, someone threw rocks through his window. Children followed him through the streets, chanting songs about savage warriors and scalps, until their mothers dragged them away, though the mother's eyes held the same hatred, just better concealed. You don't have to stay, Cade told him one evening as they sat on the stable's porch, watching the sun bleed red across the western sky. Yes, I do. Kael's fingers traced the knife at his belt, the one gesture that betrayed his nervousness. If I leave, they will say I was a spy, that we never meant peace, and if you stay, they might kill you. Then I die, proving my father's word means something. Cale looked at him. That is worth dying for. Cade wanted to argue, but he understood. In a world built on broken promises, keeping your word became the only currency that mattered. The third mail run changed everything. Samuel was willing to go again, but Marshal Quinn had other ideas. "We need more than one man," he said at the town meeting held in the church basement where lantern light threw dancing shadows on the walls. "We need to know this isn't just luck. We need proof." "What kind of proof?" someone shouted from the back. "Another rider, different route, same guarantee." Quinn looked at Cade. "Can your friends' people handle that?" "I don't know," Cade said honestly, "but I can ask." He rode north with Kyle the next morning, climbing back into the mountains where waterfalls thundered and the air tasted of pine and stone. The sentries recognized them this time, didn't draw weapons, though they didn't lower their guard either. Just watched as Cade and Kyle passed into the Stronghold's heart. Talon received them in a smaller chamber this time, less formal. He sat at a wooden table covered with maps carved into leather, showing territories and hunting grounds and symbols Cade couldn't read. When they entered, he looked up with eyes that had aged a decade in 2 weeks. "You have news." "A request," Cade said. "The settlements want to send another rider. Different route, through the western passes to Silver Creek. If it works, you want more." Talon's voice was flat. "And more after that, until our lands become roads for settlers to trample at will." "That's not, isn't it?" Talon stood. "I agreed to one route, Mercer. One promise to test if your people could keep their word even once. Now you ask for 2. Soon it will be 10, then 100. Then you will say we are being unreasonable for wanting anything left for ourselves." The words hit like fists. Cade opened his mouth to argue, but Talon wasn't finished. "Do you know what my people call this?" Talon gestured at the maps. "The slow swallow. Your people do not invade. They do not fight fair battles. They ask for small things, reasonable things, just one road, just one settlement, just one hunting ground, and piece by piece we disappear." Cale stepped forward. "Father, do not defend him." Talon's gaze was still on Cade. "He knows I am right. I see it in his face." The silence stretched until it hurt. Finally, Cade spoke. "You're right," he said. "That's exactly what happens. I've seen it. Hell, I've been part of it." He took a breath. "But that's not what I'm asking for now. I'm asking for a chance to prove we can be different. Not all of us. Maybe not even most of us. But some." "Why should I believe that?" "Because you already do." Cade held Talon's stare. "If you didn't, I'd be dead. Kyle would be dead. You'd have sent warriors south to burn Hawk's Bend the moment we stepped off your mountain. But you didn't. You want this to work as much as I do." Talon's jaw worked. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to the maps, fingers tracing routes carved into leather. "The Western Pass," he said quietly. "It cuts through territory held by the Redstone people. They are not Ash River. They answer to their own council." "Can you speak with them?" "Perhaps, but they will want something in return." Talon looked up. "What can you offer that they would value more than keeping settlers out?" Cade hadn't thought that far ahead. "What do they need?" "The same thing we all need. To be left alone. To hunt and fish and raise children without fear of being slaughtered for existing." Talon's voice hardened. "But if you want specifics, the Redstone people have a sacred site at the head of Silver Creek. For 3 generations, settlers have tried to mine it. They call it public land. To us, it is desecration." "I can talk to the mining companies." "Talk?" Talon laughed, bitter and sharp. "I am sure they will listen to your very reasonable arguments while counting their silver." "Then what do you suggest?" Talon studied him with an expression Cade couldn't quite read. "Come with me." They followed him deeper into the Stronghold, through passages that wound like veins through living rock. Other clan members nodded to Talon as they passed, but their eyes tracked Cade with open distrust. Whispers followed in their wake. Talon led them to a chamber filled with shelves carved into the walls, each shelf holding bundles wrapped in oiled cloth. He selected one carefully, unwrapped it to reveal papers, official documents, letters, land deeds. "We are not ignorant of your laws," Talon said. "We have watched, we have learned, and we have collected proof." He spread the papers across a stone table. This is a deed filed by the territorial governor claiming the Silver Creek site for mineral development. Do you know who signed it? Cade looked. The signature made his blood run cold. Benjamin Voss, he read aloud. You know him. Everyone knows him. He owns half the mining operations in Red Basin, runs them out of Fort Preston. Cade's mind raced. But this deed, it's fraudulent. The territorial survey never approved development that far north. Exactly. Talon's finger tapped the paper. But he has connections, money, influence. So the deed stands, and the Redstone people suffer. If this gets to the right authorities, who will care? Talon's voice was quiet, dangerous. Who in your government gives a damn about land rights when there is silver in the ground and money in their pockets? Cade stared at the documents, at the careful forgeries and official seals that meant nothing and everything. Talon was right. Men like Voss didn't play by rules. They bought judges, pressured officials, and when that failed, they sent hired guns to make problems disappear. But there was one person who might listen. Marshal Quinn, Cade said. He's not bought, not yet anyway. If I can get him proof, get him to bring charges. Against Benjamin Voss? Talon shook his head. That is not a fight you can win. Maybe not, but it's one I can start. Cade looked up. Let me try. Give me 2 weeks. If I can get the Silver Creek site protected, legally protected, will the Redstone people agree to safe passage? Talon was silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded to Cale. Take him to the Redstone Council. Let them hear his proposal themselves. If they agree, I will honor it. If they refuse, Talon's gaze hardened. Then we are done with promises. The Redstone Stronghold sat 3 days' ride west, carved into red sandstone cliffs that rose from the desert floor like the bones of some ancient, dying thing. Kael led the way, navigating trails that seemed to exist more in memory than reality. They passed through territories Cade had only heard about in whispered stories. The Broken Spine, where rock slides had buried entire war parties. The Weeping Canyon, where springs wept from the stone year-round. The Ghost Plains, where nothing grew and the wind sounded like voices. On the second night, they made camp in a box canyon sheltered from the wind. Cale built a small fire while Cade tended the horses. The silence between them had grown comfortable over the weeks, but tonight something felt different, heavier. You were worried, Kael said, about 100 things. Name one. Cade sat down, warming his hands against the flames. What happens if this works? If we get the site protected, if the Redstone people agree, if more routes open up? He looked at Kael. Your father's right. It won't stop there. Settlers will want more. They always do. And my people will resist. They always have. That's what scares me. Cade poked at the fire with a stick. We're not building peace. We're just postponing the next war. Kael was quiet for a moment. My grandmother used to say something. In our language it sounds better, but the meaning is, the river does not ask permission to change course. It simply flows where it must, and the land adapts or drowns. That's depressing. It is realistic. Kael smiled slightly. But she also said that smart people build channels, guide the water, make it work for them instead of against them. He met Cade's eyes. That is what we are doing, building channels. And if it doesn't work, then we drown. But at least we tried something other than damming the river with bodies. They sat in silence, watching sparks spiral into the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered. Can I ask you something? Cade said. Always. Why are you really doing this? The truth this time. Kael stared into the fire for so long Cade thought he wouldn't answer, then quietly. I had a sister. Younger. She died 3 years ago in a raid, caught in crossfire between settlers and our warriors. She was 7 years old. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. After she died, my father changed. Became harder, colder. I watched him turn into someone who could only see enemies, never people. And I thought, if I am to lead someday, I do not want to become that. I do not want to bury children and call it victory. I'm sorry. So am I. Kael looked up. But sorry does not bring her back. Sorry does not stop the next child from dying. Only change does that. only trying something impossible and stupid and probably doomed. He smiled, sad and small. Only saving one wounded boy in the desert and seeing what grows from that single act of foolishness. Cade felt something tighten in his chest. Your father know you feel this way? He knows. He does not agree. But he loves me enough to let me try. Kael's expression shifted. Just as he loved her enough to almost destroy the world when we lost her. They reached the red stone stronghold at midday, announced by horn calls that echoed off the canyon walls. The sentries were different from Ash Rivers, tattooed with red ochre, hair wrapped in braided leather, armed with spears as well as bows. They studied Cade with open suspicion, but let him pass when Kael spoke in rapid, fluid syllables that sounded like water over stones. The council met them in an open chamber carved from red rock, open to the sky. 7 elders sat in a semicircle, with a woman at the center who looked ancient enough to have watched mountains born. Her eyes were clouded with age, but her voice was clear as spring water. You bring a settler to us, son of Talon? She spoke English with an accent that made the words sound like a song. This is the one who saved you? Yes, Elder Makara. And what does this settler want? Cade stepped forward. He'd rehearsed this speech for 3 days, but standing in front of these 7 pairs of eyes, every word evaporated like morning dew. So he told the truth instead. I want to stop the mining at Silver Creek. It's wrong. It's illegal. And if your people will allow safe passage for one mail route in return, I'll fight to make it right. Makara's expression didn't change. You are one man. Benjamin Voss has armies. He has hired guns and crooked officials. That's not the same thing. It is when they have power, and you do not. Maybe. But I know people. People who are tired of men like Voss running roughshod over everyone else just because they've got money. Cade took a breath. Give me a chance. If I fail, you've lost nothing. If you succeed, we gain one route through our lands, and you gain our trust, another elder interrupted, younger than Makara, but no less fierce. That is not an equal trade. You're right, Cade agreed. But it's a start, and starts matter. The council conferred in their own language, voices rising and falling like wind through canyon rocks. Kael stood silent beside Cade, tension radiating from him like heat. Finally, Makara raised a hand. The others fell quiet. We will agree to this, she said, but on one condition. Name it. You will take one of our people with you, someone who can testify to what has been taken from us, someone the settlers cannot ignore. Her clouded eyes fixed on Cade like she could see straight through him. And if you fail, if this is simply more promises that turn to ash, you will leave our lands and never return. No more chances, no more negotiations. We will close our borders and let your people break themselves against our mountains until the end of time. Cade swallowed. I understand. Do you? Makara leaned forward. Do you understand what you are risking? Not just your life, but the lives of everyone who has begun to hope this might work? Yes. Then you are either very brave or very foolish. Cade almost smiled. I've heard that before. Makara's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. I believe you have. She gestured to someone standing in the shadows at the chamber's edge. Leora, come forward. A young woman stepped into the light, and Cade's breath caught. She was maybe 25, dressed in the simple leather and woven cloth of the Redstone people, with dark hair braided down her back and eyes the color of amber. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped him. It was the way she moved, like someone who had survived things that should have killed her and came out stronger for it, like someone who had looked at the world's worst and decided to face it anyway. This is Leora Dawn, Makara said. She is my granddaughter. She speaks your language, knows your laws, and has seen firsthand what your miners have done to our sacred places. She will go with you, she will testify, and she will report back to us whether you keep your word. Leora looked at Cade with an expression he couldn't quite read, not hostile, not friendly, just measuring. Can you do this? She asked simply. I can try. Try is not good enough. My people do not gamble on try. They need certainty. Then I'll be certain. Cade met her gaze. I'll stop Voss or I'll die trying. That certain enough? Something flickered in Leora's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect. We will see. They left the next morning, 3 of them now, instead of 2. Leora rode between Cade and Kyle, spine straight, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. She didn't speak much that first day, but Cade caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. Studying, evaluating. By the second day, she'd started asking questions. Why do you care? She reined her horse alongside his as they descended into lower country, where the red rock gave way to scrub pine and sandy earth. About Silver Creek. About peace. You could have walked away at any point. Why didn't you? I told your grandmother. You told her what she needed to hear. I am asking what is true. Cade considered lying, considered deflecting. But there was something about Leora that made dishonesty feel impossible. I'm tired of being angry, he said finally. Tired of hating people I don't even know. Tired of thinking the world has to be this way. He paused. My brother died hating, and I thought, if I die, I'd like it to be building something instead of burning it down. Leora was quiet for a long moment. Your brother, Cale told me about him. Did he? He said you saw him in Kyle when you saved his life, that you could not bear to let another young man die for a war he did not start. Cale talks too much. Cale is honest. It is refreshing. Leora's gaze was direct, unflinching. My sister died at Silver Creek. She was collecting water from the sacred spring when the miners came. They did not ask her to leave. They simply opened fire. She was 14. Cade's hands tightened on the reins. I'm sorry. Sorry does not bring her back, but stopping them from doing it again? Leora's voice was steady, controlled. That would honor her memory. That would make her death mean something. They rode in silence after that, but it felt different. Less like strangers forced together and more like allies bound by similar grief, searching for similar redemption. That night, camped under stars that burned like scattered embers, Leora told them about Silver Creek. About the spring that bubbled up from ancient rock, water so pure you could see straight to the bottom, cold even in summer's worst heat. About the ceremonies her people had held there for generations, blessing children, honoring the dead, celebrating marriages. About how the first miners had come 5 years ago, driven by rumors of silver veins, and how they'd torn into the sacred ground with picks and dynamite, turning clear water to muddy runoff, leaving scars that would take lifetimes to heal. We tried to stop them, she said, staring into the fire. Peacefully at first. We sent delegations, spoke to officials, showed them our treaties. But the treaties were old. The officials were bought. And Benjamin Voss told us that if we interfered with legal mining operations, he would send his men to teach us what happens to savages who forget their place. He said that? Cade's voice was tight. Those exact words. I was there. Leora's eyes were distant. That was when my sister decided to go back, to stand at the spring and refuse to leave. She thought if they saw her, one girl, unarmed, just trying to protect something sacred, maybe they would realize what they were destroying. But they didn't. No, they shot her, and when we carried her body home, Benjamin Voss sent a letter expressing his regrets about the unfortunate accident and offering compensation. Leora's laugh was cold. $50. That is what he valued her life at. $50, and a warning not to interfere again. Kael, who had been silent through the story, spoke up. Did you keep the letter? Yes. Why? Because it is evidence. Kael looked at Cade. Proof of his character, his intent. The kind of man he is. Cade nodded slowly. Can I see it? Leora hesitated, then reached into a pouch at her belt. She handed him a folded paper, edges worn from handling. Cade opened it carefully, reading by firelight. The letter was exactly as she'd described. Polite, condescending, offering money like that made murder acceptable. But it was the signature at the bottom that made Cade's pulse quicken. Official. Undeniable. Proof that Benjamin Voss had acknowledged the incident even as he dismissed it. This, Cade said quietly, could hang him. Only if anyone cares enough to prosecute. Leora's voice was bitter. Your laws protect men like Voss. They always have. Not always. Not if we make enough noise that they can't ignore it. Cade looked up. I know someone. A newspaper man in Fort Preston named Daniel Cross. He's written about mining abuses before. If he can publish this, along with testimony about the fraudulent land deed, along with evidence that Voss has been operating illegally, then what? Leora challenged. Voss loses his mining claim? He still has a dozen others. He still has money and power. Nothing changes. You're right. Nothing might change. Cade folded the letter carefully, handed it back. But it might. And that possibility is worth fighting for. They rode into Fort Preston 4 days later, dusty and road-weary, leading their horses through streets crowded with freight wagons, miners, and the kind of rough characters that gravitated to frontier towns like flies to corpses. Cade could feel eyes tracking them, specifically tracking Leora and Kyle. Clan members didn't come to Fort Preston. Not willingly, not without expecting violence. He led them to a boarding house on the edge of town, run by a widow named Martha Gaines who owed him a favor from years back. She took one look at his companions and sighed. "You're going to get me burned out, Mercer." "Probably. Can you keep them safe for a few hours?" "Define safe." "Alive and unshot." Martha's mouth twitched. "I'll see what I can do, but you owe me more than one favor after this." Cade left Kyle and Leora in Martha's keeping and headed across town to the newspaper office. Daniel Cross ran his operation out of a cramped building that smelled of ink and tobacco, where the printing press clattered day and night churning out editions that routinely criticized the territorial government, mining companies, and anyone else Cross thought needed criticizing. He looked up when Cade walked in, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mercer, heard you'd gone native. Didn't believe it till now." "I need your help." "Of course you do. Nobody comes to me for pleasant conversation." Cross gestured to a chair piled with newspapers. "Move those and sit. What kind of help?" Cade laid it out. Everything. The fraudulent deed, the Silver Creek massacre, Voss's letter, the possibility of testimony from eyewitnesses. As he talked, Cross's expression shifted from skeptical to intrigued to grimly satisfied. "This is good," Cross said when Cade finished. "This is very good. The kind of story that could actually make a difference." He paused. "If I can verify it, and if I can stay alive long enough to publish it. Voss will come after you. Voss already wants me dead." "This just gives him extra motivation." Cross grinned, sharp and humorless. "But here's the thing. I've got connections. Papers in Denver, Salt Lake, even back east. If this runs everywhere at once, Voss can't suppress it, can't make it disappear." "How long do you need?" "Week to verify the deed, get statements, build an ironclad case. Another few days to coordinate the release." Cross studied Cade. "You sure about this? Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Voss will burn everything you love to the ground." "I don't have much left to burn." "What about your friends? The ones you left at Martha's?" Cade thought about Kyle, about Leora, about all the people on both sides who had started to believe peace might be possible. "They're counting on me to do this right, so let's do it right." Cross extended his hand. "Then let's gut this bastard." The next week was the longest of Cade's life. Cross worked like a man possessed, gathering affidavits, interviewing witnesses, tracking down the surveyor who'd initially refused to approve Voss's claim. Cade stayed close to Leora and Kyle, watching as the town slowly realized who they were and what they represented. Threats appeared on Martha's door. Twice, groups of drunk miners tried to force their way inside, only to find Martha waiting with a shotgun and a complete lack of patience. But slowly, something else started happening. People began to listen. Not everyone. Not even most. But enough. A shopkeeper who'd lost land to mining companies. A mother whose son had died in an unsafe mine. A minister who'd been preaching about justice and finally saw a chance to practice it. Word spread that someone was finally standing up to Benjamin Voss, and that someone had evidence, witnesses, proof. On the 7th day, Marshal Quinn rode into Fort Preston. He found Cade at the boarding house, sitting on the porch with Kyle and Leora. For a long moment, Quinn just stared. Then he dismounted, climbed the steps, and sat down heavily. "I heard rumors," he said. "Didn't believe them. Then Cross sent me a preview copy of tomorrow's edition." He pulled a folded newspaper from his coat. "You really did it." The headline screamed in bold type, "Voss Mining Company exposed. Fraud, murder. and the man who profits from both. Below it, Cross had laid out everything. The forged deed, the Silver Creek massacre, testimony from Leora about her sister's death, statements from the surveyor, and the damning letter bearing Voss's signature. It was thorough, brutal, undeniable. "This goes out tomorrow?" Cade asked. "Tomorrow morning." Cross already sent copies to Denver and Salt Lake. By end of week, every paper in the territory will be running versions of it. Quinn looked at Leora. "Your testimony is the backbone. You willing to stand by it if this goes to trial?" "Yes," Leora said without hesitation. "Even knowing Voss will do everything in his power to destroy your credibility?" "He already destroyed my sister. There is nothing he can do to me that is worse." Quinn nodded slowly. Then he looked at Cade. "You know what this means? For the peace you're trying to build? It means we proved we can deliver, that promises made can be promises kept. Or it means you've started a war with the most powerful man in Red Basin." Quinn's expression was grim. "Voss won't take this lying down. He'll retaliate. And when he does, people are going to die. Then we'll deal with it when it comes." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Quinn studied him for a long moment, then stood. "All right then. I'm with you. And I suspect I won't be the only one." He tipped his hat to Leora and Cale. "Ma'am, son, hope you know what you've gotten yourselves into." After he left, the three of them sat in silence, watching the sun sink behind Fort Preston's buildings. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the story would break, and whatever came next would test everything they'd built. But tonight, for just a few hours more, they could sit together and believe it might actually work. Leora broke the silence first. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cade looked at her. "For what?" "For keeping your word. For fighting when you could have walked away. For—" she hesitated, then smiled slightly. "For being very brave or very foolish." "Definitely foolish," Kyle said. "Probably both," Cade agreed. They laughed, soft and tired, and for that moment the weight lifted. For that moment, they were just three people who'd survived impossible things and were still standing. The paper hit the streets at dawn and Fort Preston exploded. By noon, Benjamin Voss's lawyers had descended on the newspaper office like vultures on a carcass. By evening, his hired guns were making their presence known throughout Fort Preston, leaning against storefronts with rifles visible, reminding everyone who really controlled this town. But the damage was done. The story had spread too far, too fast. Copies of Cross's article were being read aloud in saloons, passed hand to hand in mining camps, discussed in hushed tones by people who'd been afraid to speak Voss's name above a whisper for years. Cade stood at Martha's window, watching the street below. Three of Voss's men lounged across the road, making no effort to hide their surveillance. They wanted to be seen, wanted everyone to know that crossing Benjamin Voss had consequences. "They are waiting for an excuse," Leora said behind him. She'd come to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell sage and wood smoke in her hair. "Give them none." "Wasn't planning on it." "Plans change when angry men with guns are involved." Her voice was calm, but Cade heard the tension underneath. "I have seen this before. The buildup, the pressure. Then someone does something stupid and everything explodes." She was right. Cade could feel it in the air, that electric charge that came before violence, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Fort Preston was a powder keg, and Voss's men were walking around with lit matches. Cale joined them at the window. "My father needs to know what is happening. If this turns violent, if settlers start killing each other over this, it will destroy everything we have built." "Can't argue with that." Cade turned away from the window. "You should ride back. Tell Talon and the Redstone Council that we kept our word. The Silver Creek claim is being challenged. The story is out. Legal proceedings are starting." "And leave you here to face Voss alone?" Cale shook his head. "No. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you saved my life." Cale's expression was set, stubborn. "Besides, if I leave now, Voss's people will say you sent me away because the story was false, that I ran when questions got difficult." "He is right," Leora added. "We must all see this through, together." Cade wanted to argue, but he knew they wouldn't budge. And truthfully, he didn't want them to. Having them here made him feel less alone in the storm that was coming. A knock on the door made all three of them tense. Martha appeared a moment later, looking grim. Daniel Cross is here. Says it's urgent. Cross looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were rumpled, ink stained his fingers, and his eyes had the feverish brightness of a man running on coffee and pure determination. He nodded to Martha, then looked at Cade. We need to talk. All of you. They gathered around Martha's kitchen table while she put on coffee. Cross spread out papers, telegrams, letters, legal documents with official seals. Good news first, Cross said. The territorial governor's office has agreed to investigate the Silver Creek deed. They're sending an inspector next week. If the fraud is confirmed, the claim gets voided and Voss loses the site. That's good, Cade said. What's the bad news? Voss knows he's losing, and when men like him lose, they burn everything down rather than accept defeat. Cross pulled out a telegram. I have a source in his operation. According to them, Voss is planning something big. An incident that will make the clans look dangerous, unreliable, and justify a military response that would shut down every peace effort in the territory. The room went cold. What kind of incident? Leora asked. The source didn't have details, but Voss has been hiring men. Not minors, professional killers. The kind you bring in when you need something that looks like a clan raid but isn't. Cale's hand went to his knife. A false flag attack. Make it look like my people broke the peace, then use it as an excuse for retaliation. Exactly. Cross looked at each of them in turn. And if he pulls it off, if people believe the clans betrayed the truce, everything you've accomplished dies. The mail routes close. The settlements demand military action. Talon has no choice but to defend his people, and we're back to full-scale war. Where? Cade demanded. Where will he strike? My source thinks Copper Ridge. Small mining camp halfway between here and Hawks Bend. Easy target, lots of civilians, and close enough to clan territory that people will believe it was a raid. Cross's voice was tight. It could happen any day now. Then we warn them, Leora said. Evacuate the camp. And tell them what? Cross spread his hands. That we think Benjamin Voss is going to stage a fake clan attack? Who's going to believe that? Voss has been building the narrative for weeks that the peace is a trap, that the clans are just waiting for settlers to let their guard down. An evacuation would look like proof he was right. Cade's mind raced through possibilities, discarding each one as fast as it appeared. They needed proof. Evidence that would expose Voss's plan before he could execute it. But how did you prove something that hadn't happened yet? Your source, he said slowly. Can they get us specifics? Names of the men Voss hired, timing, anything concrete? Maybe. But it's risky. If Voss suspects there's a leak, my source is dead. Do it anyway. We need ammunition. Cade looked at Cale and Leora. And we need to get word to your people. If Voss's men are dressed as clan warriors, real warriors need to be visible somewhere else when the attack happens. Alibis. Leora nodded. I can send a runner to my grandmother. But Kyle should go himself to speak with Talon. This kind of warning, it must come from someone he trusts completely. Cale hesitated, clearly torn between staying and going. Finally, he looked at Cade. You will watch over her? With my life. Then I will ride tonight. My father needs to know that the enemy is not at our gates. He is behind them, wearing our face. Cale's jaw tightened. And when this is over, when Voss's plan fails, I want to be standing beside you when we prove to everyone that peace is not weakness. They clasped hands, a gesture that had become familiar over the weeks. Then Kyle was gone, slipping out into the darkness to retrieve his horse and begin the hard ride north. Cross left soon after, muttering about deadlines and sources. That left Cade and Leora alone in Martha's kitchen, listening to the night sounds of Fort Preston filtering through the walls, drunken laughter, a piano playing badly, someone shouting about a card game gone wrong. You did not have to promise him that, Leora said quietly. Promise what? To watch over me with your life. I can take care of myself. I know you can. Cade met her eyes. But I meant it anyway. Something shifted in her expression. Why? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Cade thought about the past weeks, about watching Leora stand in front of hostile crowds and tell her sister's story without flinching, about the way she'd faced down Voss's lawyers with nothing but truth and conviction, about how she'd looked at the worst humanity had to offer and decided to believe in better anyway. Because you remind me why this matters, he said finally. Not the politics or the strategy or the compromises. The actual human cost of getting it wrong. Every time I look at you, I remember we're not playing games here. We're trying to save lives, and that's worth protecting. Leora was silent for a long moment. Then, to Cade's surprise, she smiled. You are either very brave or very foolish. So I've been told. I think... She hesitated. I think perhaps you are both, and I think that is exactly what this moment needs. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her skin was warm, calloused from work and writing. The touch was simple, uncomplicated, but it sent something electric through Cade's chest. When this is over, Leora said, when Voss is stopped and the peace holds, I would like to show you Silver Creek, before the miners came. There is a place upstream where the water runs clear over white stones, and in summer the wildflowers grow so thick you can barely see the ground. My sister loved it there. I'd like that. Then we have something to survive for. The next 3 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Cross's source came through with names, 12 men hired by Voss, all with reputations for violence and no moral qualms about who paid them. The plan, as far as the source could determine, was to hit Copper Ridge at dawn in 4 days, dressed in clan gear, kill enough people to make it convincing, and disappear before any organized response could arrive. Marshal Quinn brought the information to the Territorial Marshal's office, but the response was maddeningly bureaucratic. They would investigate, they said. Send someone to look into it. But that would take time, and time was the one thing they didn't have. We can't just wait for them to attack, Cade argued as he and Quinn stood outside the Marshal's office. We need to do something. Like what? Ride into Copper Ridge ourselves and stand guard? Voss's men will just pick a different target. Quinn's frustration was evident in every line of his face. We're outmanned, outgunned, and nobody with real authority gives a damn because stopping Voss means confronting how corrupt the whole system has become. Then we change the system. With what? Good intentions and 3 days' notice? Cade didn't have an answer. Quinn was right. They were playing a rigged game against an opponent who controlled the board. But giving up wasn't an option, not when so many people were counting on them. That night, lying awake in the room Martha had given him, Cade thought about his brother. About how he died still believing the world was divided into us and them, good and evil, settlers and savages. About how that simple, brutal calculus had made killing easier but living harder. And about how different things might have been if someone had shown him another way before it was too late. He was still awake when Leora knocked softly on his door. Cannot sleep either? She asked when he opened it. Too much thinking. May I come in? Cade stepped aside. Leora moved to the window, looking out at Fort Preston's scattered lights. In the darkness, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her face shadowed, she looked younger, more vulnerable. I keep thinking about my sister, she said. About how she believed standing up would matter, that her presence at the spring would change minds. Leora's voice cracked slightly. She was wrong. They killed her anyway. And I wonder, are we wrong too? Are we just more fools believing that standing up changes anything? Cade crossed to stand beside her. Your sister changed things. Maybe not the way she wanted, but her death is part of why we're here. Why Cross wrote that story. Why people are finally questioning Voss. She mattered. She should be alive to see it. Yeah, she should. Cade paused. But since she can't be, we have to make sure what she started doesn't die with her. That's how we honor her. By finishing what she began. Leora turned to face him, and in the dim light, Cade saw tears on her cheeks. Without thinking, he reached up to wipe them away. She caught his hand, held it against her face. I am afraid, she whispered. I have been afraid since the day she died, but I hid it because someone had to be strong. But now, with everything about to break open, I am terrified that we will fail, that all this hope we have built will shatter and take us with it. Then we'll be terrified together. Cade's other hand came up to cup her face. And we'll keep going anyway, because that's what people do when they love something enough to die for it. And what do you love enough to die for, Cade Mercer? The answer should have been complicated, should have required thought and consideration. But standing there with Leora looking up at him with tear-bright eyes, it was the simplest thing in the world. This, he said, you The possibility that we might actually build something better. All of it. He kissed her then, and she kissed him back with a fierceness that spoke of desperation and hope tangled together. They pulled apart, breathing hard, and Leora laughed, sharp and surprised. "That was very foolish," she said. "Probably. My grandmother will be furious. There are customs, protocols, ways these things are supposed to happen." "Do you care?" Leora smiled, bright and reckless. "Not even a little bit." They spent that night talking, sharing stories about childhood spent in different worlds that turned out to have more similarities than differences. Leora told him about learning to ride before she could walk, about summers spent following the deer herds through high country, about winters huddled around fires, while elders told stories that went back generations. Cade talked about growing up in a settlement where every day was a fight against the land, the weather, and the constant fear of attack. About losing his brother and feeling like part of himself had died too. As dawn painted the sky gray, Leora stood to leave, but at the door she turned back. "When we survive this," she said, "I want to try. Not just peace between our peoples, but us. Together. Whatever that looks like. Even though it's complicated? Especially because it is complicated. The easy things are never worth having." She left before Cade could respond, but he stood at the window watching the sunrise and feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite hope. That was still too fragile. But maybe the shadow of hope. The possibility that on the other side of the coming storm, something good might be waiting. Cross found him at breakfast with news that made Cade's blood run cold. "My source just sent word. The attack's been moved up. It's happening tonight." The room spun. "Tonight? You're sure?" Voss must have caught wind that we're onto him. He's accelerating the timeline. Cross's hands shook as he spread out a map on the table. Copper Ridge. Midnight. 12 men dressed as clan warriors. They'll hit fast, burn what they can, kill anyone who resists, and be gone before dawn. We have to warn them. Already sent a rider, but even if he gets there in time, what are they supposed to do? Most of those miners have never fired a weapon outside of scaring off claim jumpers. They're not fighters. Cade stared at the map, his mind racing. Copper Ridge sat in a valley with limited approaches, surrounded by rocky hills that would give attackers perfect cover. Defensively, it was a nightmare. But those same hills also meant limited escape routes. An idea began to form. Dangerous. Probably insane. But possibly their only chance. "How many people can you trust?" he asked Quinn, who'd joined them. "Real trust. People who would ride into hell if you asked them?" Quinn's eyes narrowed. "Maybe a dozen." "Why?" "Because we're going to Copper Ridge. Not to defend it, to catch Voss's men in the act, and prove to everyone exactly who's really attacking." "That's suicide," Cross said flatly. "Maybe. But it's also our only shot at exposing the truth before it gets buried." Cade looked at each of them. Voss is counting on confusion, on people being too scared and angry to ask questions. But if we can capture even one of his men alive, if we can show everyone that these clan raiders are actually hired killers on Voss's payroll, then the whole narrative collapses, Quinn finished. And Voss goes down for murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Exactly. It could also get us all killed. I know. Quinn was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. I'll round up who I can, but Mercer, if this goes wrong, we won't be around to see the fallout. If this goes wrong, there won't be a piece left to save anyway. By mid-afternoon, they'd assembled a force of 15 men, not nearly enough for a straight fight, but potentially enough for an ambush if they were smart and lucky. Quinn had handpicked each one, settlers who were tired of Voss's stranglehold on the territory, former soldiers who knew how to fight, and a few who simply believed that what they were building with the clans was worth defending. Leora insisted on coming. Cade tried to argue, but she shut him down with a look that could have melted steel. "This is my fight as much as yours," she said. "More, perhaps. They murdered my sister. I will be there when justice comes." They rode out as the sun touched the western horizon, taking the hard trail that would get them to Copper Ridge, ahead of Voss's men. The country was rough. Broken stone and scrub pine, creek beds that had run dry in summer's heat. They pushed their horses as fast as they dared, knowing that every minute counted. They reached Copper Ridge just as full darkness fell. The mining camp was small, maybe 30 buildings scattered around a central square, with prospect holes dotting the surrounding hills. Quinn's warning rider had arrived hours earlier, and the miners had responded by barricading themselves in the largest building, leaving the rest of the camp eerily empty. Cade gathered his small force on the ridge overlooking the camp. "They'll come from the north," he said, pointing to the narrow trail that led through the hills. "It's the only approach that gives them cover almost to the edge of camp. We split into 3 groups. Quinn, you take 5 men and set up on the east side. When they enter the camp, you cut off their retreat. I'll take another 5 west and do the same. The last group stays here on the ridge with rifles. Once Voss's men are committed, once they've started the attack and there's no question about their intent, we spring the trap." "And if they don't come," one of the men asked, "then we've spent a cold night in the hills for nothing, but I don't think that's going to happen." They moved into position, finding cover among the rocks and stunted trees. Cade settled behind a boulder with Leora beside him, rifle loaded and ready. The wait was agony. Minutes crawled by like hours. The moon rose, painting everything in silver and shadow. Then, just after midnight, movement. 12 figures materialized from the darkness, moving low and fast through the north trail, exactly as Cade had predicted. Even from a distance, he could see they were dressed to look like clan warriors. Leather and bone ornaments, faces painted, weapons that mimicked the style if not the authentic craft. But their movements gave them away. These weren't warriors raised on this land. They were hired guns playing dress-up, and they moved like men who expected an easy slaughter. Cade's hand tightened on his rifle. Beside him, Leora was utterly still, barely breathing. The false raiders reached the edge of camp. Their leader, a big man with a scarred face, gestured to his men. They spread out, approaching the barricaded building where the miners had gathered. One of them produced a torch, held it high. "This is it," Cade whispered. "Wait for my signal." The leader raised his voice, shouting in mangled approximation of the clan language. It was gibberish to anyone who actually spoke it, but to terrified settlers it would sound authentic enough. He threw the torch against the building's wall. The wood, old and dry, caught immediately. That was when Cade stood up and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley like thunder. Every head snapped toward the ridge. For one frozen moment, the false raiders stared up at the line of armed men suddenly visible on the hillside. Then Quinn's voice rang out from the east. "Drop your weapons! You're surrounded!" The leader's response was to open fire. Bullets whined off rocks, kicking up stone chips and dust. Cade's men returned fire, not aiming to kill but to pin them down, to keep them from escaping while Quinn and the others closed the net. It should have worked, but the leader was smarter than Cade had given him credit for. Instead of fighting or fleeing, he grabbed one of his own men, put a gun to the man's head, and shouted, "Back off, or I kill him!" The shooting stopped. Silence fell like a blanket. "I know you," the leader shouted, squinting up at the ridge. "Cade Mercer, the breed lover. You think you can stop this? You think anyone cares what happens to these miners?" He laughed, harsh and ugly. "Voss owns this territory. He owns the marshal, the governor, everyone who matters. You're just a dead man who doesn't know it yet." "Maybe," Cade called back, "but you're not leaving this valley alive unless you surrender. And when people ask what happened here tonight, they're going to hear the truth about who really attacked Copper Ridge." "Truth?" The leader's laugh was wild now, edging toward hysteria. "Nobody cares about truth. They care about who they're afraid of. And after tonight, after we're done, they'll be afraid of the clans again. They'll demand blood, and your precious peace will burn like this building." He shoved his hostage forward and raised his pistol toward the barricaded miners. But before he could fire, a shot rang out from the ridge. The leader dropped like a cut string, a red bloom spreading across his chest. Leora lowered her rifle, her face carved from stone. "That," she said quietly, "was for my sister." The remaining false raiders broke. Some tried to run. Others threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Quinn's men swarmed in, securing them with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, it was over. 9 men captured alive, 2 dead, 1 escaped into the darkness. The miners emerged from their barricaded building, confused and frightened but unharmed. Quinn explained what had happened while Cade walked among the captured men, studying their faces. He recognized 2 of them from Voss's mining operations. Professional killers, just as Cross's source had said. One of them spat at Cade's feet. "Voss will have your head for this." "Probably, but not before everyone knows what he tried to do here." Cade crouched down to meet the man's eyes. "You're going to testify. You're going to tell everyone exactly who hired you, what you were paid to do, and how this whole thing was planned. And you're going to do it because if you don't, you'll hang for murder and conspiracy. But if you do testify, if you help us take down Voss, maybe you get to see old age. Your choice." The man stared at him with hatred, but underneath the hatred, Cade saw something else. Fear. The realization that he'd bet on the wrong side and now had to live with the consequences. "I want a deal in writing," the man said finally. "You'll get it. Quinn, take them into Fort Preston. Get their statements on record before Voss even knows what happened." As Quinn organized the prisoners for transport, Leora came to stand beside Cade. The barricaded building still burned, sending embers spiraling into the night sky. The miners were already organizing bucket brigades to keep the fire from spreading. "We did it," she said softly. "We survived. That's not the same as winning." "No, but it is a start." She took his hand, and tomorrow, when word spreads about what really happened here, when people see that Voss tried to destroy the peace and we stopped him, that is when we start winning. Cade wanted to believe her, wanted to think that truth would be enough, but he'd lived too long on the frontier to trust in easy victories. Still, as he stood there with Leora's hand in his and watched Quinn's men haul Voss's hired killers away, he felt something shift. Not certainty, not even confidence, but maybe the sense that for once, for the first time in years, they'd done something that mattered, something that might actually change the tide. They rode back to Fort Preston as dawn broke, exhausted and smoke-stained, but alive. Word of what had happened at Copper Ridge was already spreading. By the time they reached town, people lined the streets, some cheering, some silent, all watching with expressions that ranged from shock to cautious hope. Daniel Cross met them at the newspaper office, grinning like a wolf. "I've already got the story ready to run," he said, "with testimony from the captured men. Voss is finished. The governor's office has issued a warrant for his arrest. The territorial marshal is en route to Fort Preston right now to take him into custody." "Where is Voss?" Cade asked. "Holed up in his compound with what's left of his men. But he can't stay there forever. It's over, Mercer. You won." But even as Cross spoke, Cade felt unease prickling at the back of his neck. Men like Benjamin Voss didn't go down quietly. They didn't accept defeat. They lashed out, trying to take as many people with them as they could, and Cade had just made himself Voss's primary target. He was right to worry. That afternoon, as he and Leora were preparing to ride north to bring news to Talon and the councils, a boy came running into Martha's boarding house, breathless and terrified. "Mr. Mercer, Marshal Quinn needs you at the jail, right now." They ran. The jail was 2 blocks away, a squat stone building that usually held drunks and petty thieves. But when Cade burst through the door, he found chaos. Quinn stood over a body, one of Voss's captured men, the one who'd agreed to testify. Someone had cut his throat. "It happened an hour ago," Quinn said, his voice tight with fury. "One of Voss's men bribed a deputy, got in here and silenced our star witness before he could talk. The others? Still alive. Scared out of their minds, but alive. I've got them under guard now with people I actually trust." Quinn looked at Cade. "This is going to make the trial harder. Without his testimony, we still have 8 other men who can testify. And we have the physical evidence, the clan gear they were wearing, the weapons, the map of Copper Ridge we found on the leader's body." Cade forced his voice to stay level. "Voss is desperate. This proves it. He's losing, and he knows it." But as he said the words, Cade couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still coming. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, he thought about all the people counting on him, the miners at Copper Ridge, the clan members who'd started to believe peace was possible, Kyle and Talon, Leora, sleeping in the room next to his, trusting that tomorrow would be better than today. And he thought about his brother, who'd died believing the world was too broken to fix, and wondered what he would say if he could see what Cade was trying to build now. Probably call him a fool, but maybe, just maybe, he'd also be proud. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days later with 20 armed men and a warrant that accused Benjamin Voss of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and incitement to violence. By then, Fort Preston had transformed into something Cade barely recognized. Where suspicion and fear had ruled for weeks, now there was something else. Not quite celebration, but a cautious, fragile sense that maybe the impossible was actually happening. Cade watched from the boarding house window as the marshal's men surrounded Voss's compound. It was a standoff that lasted 6 hours, with Voss barricaded inside, refusing to surrender, while his remaining hired guns positioned themselves at windows with rifles. The marshal tried negotiation, then threats. Finally, he gave Voss a choice: come out peacefully or watch his compound burn. Voss emerged at sunset, immaculately dressed despite everything, walking with his head high like a man who still believed he controlled the world. But his eyes, when they swept across the gathered crowd, were filled with pure hatred. They found Cade standing beside Leora, and for a moment their gazes locked. "This isn't over, Mercer," Voss called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you've won? You've signed your own death warrant, and hers." He nodded toward Leora. "The day will come when you realize you backed the wrong side, and I'll be there to watch you burn." 2 marshals grabbed him, forced him toward the jail. But even as they dragged him away, Voss kept talking, kept making promises of vengeance that echoed through Fort Preston's streets like a curse. Leora's hand found Cade's. Her fingers were trembling slightly. "He means it," she said quietly. "Men like that, they do not forgive. They do not forget." "I know." Cade squeezed her hand. "But he's locked up now. And by the time he sees daylight again, if he ever does, the world will have moved on without him." He wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. But Voss's words lingered like smoke, acrid and choking. That evening, Kyle returned from the north with news that changed everything. He rode into Fort Preston accompanied by Talon himself, along with a delegation of 20 warriors from both Ash River and Redstone clans. The sight of them riding openly through the streets, armed but with weapons sheathed, proud but not hostile, sent whispers rippling through the crowd. Cade met them at the livery stable. Talon dismounted, and for a long moment he and Cade simply studied each other. Then Talon extended his hand. "My son tells me you stopped the attack, that you exposed Voss's treachery and saved lives on both sides." Cade shook his hand. "We did what had to be done. More than that, you kept your word when it would have been easier to walk away, when your own people would have forgiven you for abandoning the peace." Talon's grip was iron strong. "That means something, to me, to my people, to all the clans who have been watching to see if this fragile thing we built would survive its first real test." "It survived. Barely. Barely is enough." Talon looked past Cade to where Leora stood. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of what had grown between them. "We have come to formalize the treaty, to make promises official in a way that cannot be easily broken or forgotten. Will your people agree to this?" "I think so, but I'm not the one who speaks for them." "No, but you are the one they will listen to." Talon's voice was grave. "Gather your leaders. Tomorrow we will sit together and put words to what we have built with blood and risk. And perhaps if we are very lucky and very wise, we will create something that outlasts all of us." The meeting was held in the town hall, a building that had never hosted anything more significant than arguments over water rights and livestock disputes. Now it held the future of the entire frontier. On one side sat the settlement leaders: Marshal Quinn, representatives from Hawks Bend, Copper Ridge, and 3 other mining camps, the territorial governor's assistant, and Daniel Cross to record everything for posterity. On the other side sat Talon, Elder Makara, the leaders of 4 other clans, and a council of warriors and elders whose names Cade was still learning. Cade and Leora sat between them, literally and figuratively bridging the gap. The negotiations took 2 full days. Every point was argued, examined from every angle, tested against worst-case scenarios and hopeful possibilities. The clans wanted guarantees that sacred sites would be protected, that hunting grounds wouldn't be overrun, that their sovereignty would be respected. The settlements wanted assurance that trade routes would remain open, that disputes would be settled through mediation, not violence, that the clans wouldn't use the peace as cover for building strength to attack later. It was exhausting, frustrating. Several times one side or the other threatened to walk away, but each time someone would pull them back from the edge. Quinn reminding the settlers how many lives had been lost to endless war. Makara telling her people that their children deserve to grow up knowing something other than fear and bloodshed. Talon speaking of his daughter who'd died and his son who'd nearly followed, and how he refused to let their sacrifices be meaningless. And Cade, when the arguments grew too heated, simply asking, "What's the alternative? Because if we can't make this work, if we can't find a way to share this land without destroying each other, then we're all dead. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but eventually. Is that what we want?" No one could answer yes. On the third day, they signed the treaty. It was written on parchment in both English and the primary clan language, witnessed by representatives from both sides, and sealed with wax and ribbons like it was something official and permanent and real. The treaty established 5 guaranteed trade routes through clan territory, created a council of 12, 6 from settlements, 6 from clans, to mediate disputes and make decisions about shared resources. Designated protected areas where mining and development were forbidden. Set up a system of messengers who could travel freely to maintain communication. And most importantly, it established that violence from either side would be investigated jointly, with punishments decided by the full council rather than one group taking revenge on the other. It wasn't perfect. There were holes and ambiguities that would need to be addressed later, but it was a start, a foundation. When the last signature was added, when the document was rolled and sealed, the room fell silent. Then Talon stood. "This treaty is built on the bodies of those we have lost," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "My daughter, Leora's sister, Cade's brother, thousands of others whose names we will never know. They paid for our hatred with their lives. The least we can do, the very least, is honor them by refusing to create more dead, by choosing every single day to build instead of burn." Elder Makara rose next. "Our people have fought for 20 years. Some of you have known nothing but war your entire lives. Peace will not be easy. It will not be comfortable. You will have to look at faces you have been taught to hate and see human beings instead. You will have to trust where before you only feared. This will be the hardest thing you have ever done." She paused. "But it will also be the most important, because peace is not something that happens to you. It is something you create day by day, choice by choice. And it starts now." The hall remained quiet. Then, slowly, people began to stand. First Quinn, then Kyle, then others, one by one, until everyone was on their feet. It wasn't applause, it was something deeper. Acknowledgement, commitment. The weight of a promise that everyone in that room would now have to keep. That night, there was a celebration in Fort Preston's main square. It was awkward at first. Settlers and clan members eyeing each other uncertainly, not sure how to act now that they weren't enemies. But someone brought out whiskey, and someone else started playing a fiddle, and gradually the ice began to crack. Cade found himself standing with Kyle and Leora, watching as a group of miners taught clan children a folk dance, while their parents watched with expressions that ranged from amused to horrified. "This is very strange," Kyle observed. "Which part?" Cade asked. "All of it. 6 months ago, these same people would have killed each other on sight. Now they are dancing. People are adaptable when they have to be, or when they are given permission to be human instead of enemies." Leora smiled. "Look at them. Really look. The fear is still there, the suspicion, but also curiosity, hope, the beginning of something that might actually last." Talon approached, carrying a cup that smelled strongly of the harsh local whiskey. He looked tired, but more relaxed than Cade had ever seen him. "My son tells me you plan to marry," Talon said without preamble. Cade nearly choked on his drink. Beside him, Leora went very still. Cade stammered. "Do not bother denying it. I have eyes." Talon's expression was unreadable. Elder Makara has eyes, too. She is not pleased. There are traditions, ceremonies, approvals that should be sought. You have done none of these things. We haven't even— "But you will." Talon cut him off. "I know my son. I know how he looks at things he cares about. And I see that same look when you watch Leora. So I am telling you now, before you do something that creates a diplomatic incident, come to us properly. Ask permission properly. Do this the right way, so that when the inevitable complaints come from both sides, we can say all protocols were followed." Leora found her voice. "Grandmother said nothing to me about this." Your grandmother said many things to me. Most of them involved how foolish you are and how I should forbid this match immediately. Talon's stern expression cracked, revealing something that might have been a smile. I told her that forbidding young people in love is like trying to stop a river with your hands. It cannot be done, and the attempt only makes you wet and angry. So you approve? Cade asked carefully. I think you are both idiots who are going to make everything more complicated. Talon's voice was dry. But I also think that if peace between our peoples can survive you two marrying, it can survive anything. So yes, I approve. On the condition that you do this properly, with ceremony and witnesses and all the tedious formality that makes our elders happy. Leora laughed, bright and surprised. Thank you, Talon. Thank me by not dying stupidly before the wedding. My son would never forgive either of us. He walked away, leaving Cade and Leora staring at each other. Did that just happen? Cade asked. I think so. Leora's eyes were bright. Are you going to ask me properly, or do I need to ask you? I'm not sure I know how to ask properly by your customs. Then improvise. You are good at that. Cade took her hands, suddenly aware that they had an audience. Kyle grinning like a fool, several clan members watching with interest, and at least a dozen settlers pretending not to pay attention while clearly listening to every word. Leora Dawn, he said, feeling ridiculous and terrified and happier than he'd been in years. Will you marry me? Knowing that it's going to cause problems and complications and probably get us both in trouble with our respective peoples on a regular basis? Yes, she said simply. For exactly those reasons. Because if we can make this work, we prove to everyone that the impossible is possible. That's a terrible reason to get married. It is a perfect reason to get married. She pulled him close and kissed him, and the watching crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers, laughter, and a few scandalized gasps. The wedding was planned for 3 weeks later, time enough to satisfy both sets of traditions and for word to spread throughout the territory. It would be held at Silver Creek, at the sacred spring that had been the center of so much pain and was now, officially, protected territory that no mining company could ever touch again. Those 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation, negotiations over ceremony details, and the careful, delicate work of keeping the fragile peace from shattering. There were incidents. A drunk settler started a fight with a clan hunter. A group of young warriors harassed a mail rider. But each time the new council met, investigated, and handed down punishments that both sides accepted. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Benjamin Voss went on trial in the territorial capital. The evidence against him was overwhelming. 8 of his hired men testified about the planned attack on Copper Ridge. Documents proved the fraudulent land claims. Witnesses described the murder of Leora's sister. The verdict took less than a day, guilty on all counts. The sentence, 20 years hard labor. Cade wasn't there to see it. He was at Silver Creek, helping prepare for a wedding that felt both intensely personal and politically significant beyond anything he'd imagined. The day before the ceremony, as he and Kyle were setting up the ceremonial fire pit, a rider came from the north. The man was covered in dust and rode a horse that looked ready to collapse. He dismounted, swaying with exhaustion, and asked for Talon. Cade's gut clenched. Nothing good ever came from a messenger who rode that hard. Talon emerged from one of the temporary shelters that had been erected for the wedding guests. The messenger spoke rapidly in the clan language, gesturing urgently. With each word, Talon's expression grew darker. Finally, he turned to Cade. There is trouble. A war chief named Black Rook has rejected the treaty. He has taken his followers, perhaps 50 warriors, and attacked a settlement patrol near the northern border. The bottom dropped out of Cade's world. How many dead? 3 settlers, 2 of Black Rook's men, the rest scattered. Talon's voice was hard. Black Rook says the treaty is weakness, that we have surrendered to settlers who will never stop taking until we have nothing left. He is calling for others to join him, to reject the peace and return to war. Can you stop him? I can try, but Black Rook is respected among certain factions, young warriors who see the treaty as their fathers, giving up everything their grandfathers died for. If he gains support, Talon didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Kyle stepped forward. I will go with you. Help you convince the other clans that Black Rook is wrong. No. Talon's voice was firm. You will stay here. Finish what you started. Show everyone that peace is not weakness by standing at your friend's wedding and proving that two peoples can celebrate together without bloodshed. He looked at Cade. I will handle Black Rook. You focus on building something worth defending. And if you can't stop him, then we fight. Not settlers against clans, but those who want peace against those who want war. Talon's jaw was set. This treaty will survive. I swear it. But it may cost more than any of us anticipated. He left within the hour, taking 30 warriors with him. The mood at Silver Creek turned somber. People whispered about Black Rook, about whether the peace would survive its first real internal challenge, about what it meant that violence was brewing even as they prepared for a celebration. Leora found Cade standing by the sacred spring, staring into water so clear he could see every stone on the bottom. You are thinking of calling it off, she said. It wasn't a question. People are dying. Black Rook's people, settlers on patrol. And we're about to have a party. Cade's voice was bitter. It feels wrong. It feels exactly right. Leora moved to stand beside him. Black Rook wants us to be afraid, to doubt, to think that peace is impossible and we should give up trying. The best way to defeat him is to prove him wrong, to show everyone that despite the violence, despite the setbacks, we refuse to surrender what we have built. And if the wedding becomes a target, if he attacks here, then we defend it, together, settlers and clans side by side, protecting something that matters. She took his hand. But I do not think he will come. Black Rook is many things, but he is not stupid. Attacking a wedding attended by both peoples would unite everyone against him faster than anything Talon could say or do. She was right. Cade knew she was right, but the fear lingered. The wedding day dawned clear and cold with frost silvering the grass around Silver Creek. By mid-morning, over 200 people had gathered, clans from 6 different territories, settlers from a dozen different camps and towns, even a few territorial officials who'd come to witness what they were calling the marriage of the century. The ceremony itself was a blend of both traditions. Leora wore the traditional woven dress of her people, decorated with symbols that told her family's history. Cade wore the closest thing to formal clothes he owned, a clean shirt, vest, and the only pair of pants without holes. Elder Makara performed the clan portions of the ceremony, speaking in flowing syllables that sounded like water and wind. Marshal Quinn, standing in for the territorial magistrate, handled the settler legal requirements. But the heart of it was simpler than either tradition required. Cade and Leora stood facing each other beside the spring where her sister had died, where miners had desecrated sacred ground, where so much pain had been inflicted. And they promised to build something better, to honor the dead by refusing to create more, to love each other, and through that love, to love the fragile peace they represented. When it was done, when they were officially married by both clan law and territorial law, the gathered crowd erupted in celebration. Music started, fiddles and drums, settler songs and clan chants blending into something neither and both. Food appeared, shared freely between groups that 6 months ago would have killed each other over much less. Cade danced with his wife, feeling the word settle strange and wonderful in his mind. Around them, the celebration grew. Children played together, heedless of which side their parents came from. Warriors and settlers shared whiskey and stories. Elder Makara and Marshal Quinn got into what looked like a heated argument about philosophy that ended with both of them laughing. It was imperfect, messy, complicated, but it was real. As the sun set and fires were lit against the gathering darkness, Kael found them. His face was serious. A runner just arrived from my father. Black Rook has been contained. Talon and the other clan leaders cornered him in the high country. They gave him a choice: accept the treaty and return to his people, or be cast out, banished from all clan territories. What did he choose? Leora asked. Exile. He and 12 of his most loyal followers have left, heading into the deep wilderness. They are no longer our problem. Kael's expression lightened. My father says the other clans have reaffirmed their commitment to the treaty, that what happened here today, this wedding, this celebration, it proved to the doubters that peace is not surrender, it is strength. Relief flooded through Cade so intense it made him dizzy. It's over then, the immediate crisis. For now, there will be others. Black Rook will not be the last to reject the treaty, but we have proven we can survive challenges from within. That is worth celebrating. He clapped Cade on the shoulder and went to join the dancing, leaving Cade and Leora alone beneath stars that burned like scattered diamonds. "We did it," Leora whispered. "We survived. That's not the same as winning." "You said that before, at Copper Ridge." She smiled. "And I will say again what I said then. Surviving is winning. Every day we keep this peace alive. Every moment we choose building over burning, that is victory. Even when it's hard? Especially when it is hard." She kissed him softly. "The easy things are never worth having, remember?" They stood together, watching their people. And they were their people now, both sides, united in this fragile thing they'd built, celebrate something that shouldn't have been possible. And Cade thought about his brother, about all the people who died believing the world couldn't change, and wished they could see this. Wished they could know that their deaths hadn't been meaningless, that the pain they'd suffered had planted seeds that were finally, impossibly, beginning to grow. The celebration lasted 3 days. By the time people began to drift back to their homes and territories, something fundamental had shifted. The treaty was no longer just words on parchment. It was real, tested, proven capable of surviving challenges from both without and within. Cade and Leora stayed at Silver Creek for a week after the wedding, living in a small cabin that had been built for them as a wedding gift. They spent their days exploring the surrounding country, riding through valleys and over ridges that Leora had known since childhood. She taught him the names of plants in her language, showed him how to read weather patterns in the shape of clouds, told him stories about her sister and the childhood they'd shared before war consumed everything. He told her about his brother, about the guilt he'd carried for years thinking he could have done something to save him, about the anger that had eaten at him until Kael's bleeding body in the desert had shocked him into seeing a different path. "Do you think they would approve?" Leora asked one evening as they sat watching sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and crimson. "Your brother and my sister. Of us. Of this." "I don't know," Cade admitted. "They died angry, hurt, believing the worst about each other's people. Maybe they'd think we betrayed them by making peace. Or maybe they would be relieved that we found a way to stop the cycle that killed them." Leora leaned against him. "I choose to believe that, because the alternative, that their hatred was so deep nothing could ever heal it, that is too sad to bear." "Then we'll believe it together." They returned to Fort Preston to find the town transformed yet again. 3 new buildings had gone up in their absence, including a trading post specifically for clan goods, furs, woven cloth, carved tools, to be sold to settlers. A clan family had moved into a house on the edge of town, the first to do so permanently. And Daniel Cross's newspaper had expanded to 4 pages to cover all the changes rippling through the territory. But there was also news that made Cade's blood run cold. Benjamin Voss had escaped. 2 days ago, Quinn explained as they stood in his office, staring at a wanted poster with Voss's face. Prison transport was ambushed 20 miles from the territorial capital. 4 guards dead. Voss and 6 other prisoners gone. Authorities think they headed south, but nobody knows for certain. "He'll come here," Cade said flatly. "He promised he'd watch me burn. He meant it." "Maybe. Or maybe he'll run, leave the territory entirely, and start over somewhere his name doesn't carry 20 years in chains." Quinn didn't sound convinced. "Either way, I've doubled patrols, put out alerts. If Voss shows his face anywhere near Fort Preston, we'll know about it." But Cade knew it wouldn't be enough. Voss was smart, ruthless, and now had nothing left to lose. That made him more dangerous than he'd ever been. He told Leora that night, half expecting her to be afraid. Instead, she simply nodded. "Then we will be careful. We will not give him easy targets, and we will trust that the peace we have built is strong enough to survive one bitter man's revenge." "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple. It is necessary." She took his hand. "We cannot live in fear, Cade. That is what people like Voss want. They want us afraid, second-guessing, wondering if we made a mistake. But we did not make a mistake. We built something good, and we will defend it." For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Life continued with a normalcy that felt surreal. The Treaty Council met weekly, handling disputes over grazing rights and trade agreements. More clan families visited the settlements, testing the peace. More settlers traveled through clan territory without incident. It was working. Then came the night everything shattered. Cade and Leora were having dinner at Martha's boarding house when they heard the explosion, a deep boom that rattled windows and sent dishes crashing to the floor. They ran outside to find flames shooting into the sky from the direction of the new trading post. The building was fully engulfed by the time they arrived. People were already forming bucket brigades, trying to keep the fire from spreading to neighboring structures. In the chaos, it took several minutes for anyone to realize the worst part. The clan family who'd been living above the trading post, a couple with 2 young children, were trapped inside. Cade didn't think. He just ran. Straight through the front door into smoke so thick he couldn't see his own hands. Heat seared his face and lungs. He could hear screaming from upstairs, high and terrified. The stairs were burning. He climbed anyway, feeling wood splinter beneath his feet. The smoke was worse on the second floor, black and choking. He dropped to his knees, crawling, following the sound of crying. He found them in the back room, the mother clutching her children, the father trying desperately to break through a window that wouldn't budge. Cade grabbed the man's arm, pointed toward the stairs. The father shook his head frantically, gesturing at the flames. No choice then. Cade picked up a chair, hurled it through the window. Glass exploded outward. Fresh air rushed in, feeding the fire but creating an escape route. He helped the mother through first, passing the children down to waiting hands below. Then the father. Finally, Cade himself tumbled out, hitting the ground hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. Hands pulled him away from the building. He looked up to see Leora's face, streaked with soot and tears. "You idiot," she said. "You absolute idiot." "They're alive?" "Yes, because of you." She helped him sit up. "But if you ever do something that's stupid again..." The building collapsed behind them with a roar like thunder, sending embers spiraling into the night sky. The crowd that had gathered fell silent, watching everything burn. Marshal Quinn appeared, his face grim. "This wasn't an accident. I found evidence of accelerant. Someone set this deliberately." "Voss?" Cade said. "Maybe. Or someone working for him." Either way, Quinn's expression was deadly. "This is war. He just declared it. See." But if Voss had expected the attack to divide the community, to make settlers turn against clans in fear, he'd badly miscalculated. Instead, the opposite happened. Settlers and clan members worked side by side through the night, fighting the fire, salvaging what could be saved, caring for the burned-out family. And when morning came, when the ashes were still smoking and everyone was exhausted, Talon rode into Fort Preston with 50 warriors at his back. He found Cade sitting on what was left of the trading post steps, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat radiating from the ruins. "My people tell me you saved them," Talon said without preamble. "Anyone would have done it." "No, not anyone. Most would have watched and called it tragedy. You ran into fire." Talon sat down beside him, ignoring the heat. "Voss did this?" "We think so. Then we hunt him. Together. Settlers and clans tracking the man who would destroy what we have built." Talon's voice was iron. "And when we find him, he faces justice. Real justice, decided by our treaty council, not revenge killings or vigilante mobs. We prove that this peace has teeth, that those who attack it will be held accountable." He could be anywhere by now. Perhaps. But men like Voss cannot help themselves. They must see the results of their destruction. They must gloat. Talon stood. "He is still here. Somewhere close. Watching. And we are going to find him." Talon was right. Voss hadn't run far. They found his camp 2 days later, hidden in a box canyon 15 miles south of Fort Preston. A clan scout spotted smoke from a poorly concealed fire, and when the combined force of settlers and warriors moved in to investigate, they found evidence everywhere, discarded accelerant containers matching those used in the trading post fire, maps of Fort Preston with buildings marked for attack, and supplies enough for a group planning a sustained campaign of terror. But Voss himself was gone. He'd abandoned the camp hours before, leaving behind only 2 of his hired men who surrendered without a fight when faced with 30 armed warriors and a dozen armed settlers working together. "He knows we are coming," Talon said as they searched the abandoned camp. "He is running now, trying to put distance between himself and justice." "Or setting a trap," Quinn countered. He held up one of the maps, pointing to marks that indicated ambush points and defensive positions. Voss is a bastard, but he's not stupid. He left these for us to find. He wants us to follow. Cade studied the map, tracing the route with his finger. It led deeper into the Badlands, through terrain that favored ambushers over pursuers. Perfect country for a small group to bleed a larger force. Then we don't follow, not the way he expects. Cade looked at Talon. Your people know this country better than anyone. Is there another way around? Talon called over one of his warriors, a woman named Swiftwater, who'd spent years hunting in the Southern Territories. She studied the map, then nodded slowly. There is an old trail, very narrow, very dangerous, but it circles north and comes out above this canyon here. She tapped the map. If Voss is planning to ambush anyone following the main route, we could come at him from behind. How long? Quinn asked. 2 days hard riding. Maybe less if we push. Then we push. Cade folded the map. But we're not taking everyone. A small group moves faster, makes less noise. 10 men, mixed group, settlers and clan. We flush Voss out, drive him toward the main force waiting here. It was risky. But everything about this situation was risky. They split their forces, with Talon leading the main group along the obvious route, while Cade, Quinn, Cale, Swiftwater, and 6 others took the narrow trail that wound through country so rough it barely deserved the name. Leora insisted on coming. Cade tried to argue, but she shut him down with a look that reminded him exactly who he'd married. Voss murdered my sister, she said quietly. I have earned the right to see this through. So she rode with them, as did a young settler named Thomas, whose father had died in one of Voss's mines, and a clan warrior named Grey Wolf, who'd lost his wife to a raid Voss had orchestrated years ago. They were united by grief and the determination to ensure that Voss faced consequences for everything he'd done. The trail was worse than Swiftwater had described. In places it was barely wide enough for a horse, with sheer drops on one side and crumbling rock walls on the other. They rode single file, in silence, breathing dust and trying not to think about what would happen if a horse missed its footing. On the second day, as they descended into the canyon where Swiftwater believed Voss would be waiting, they heard gunfire echoing off the stone walls. Talon's group had found Voss. Cade spurred his horse forward, the others following. They came out on a ridge overlooking a narrow defile where Voss and his remaining men, maybe 8 of them, had indeed set up an ambush. But Talon hadn't walked into it blindly. His warriors had spread out, using the terrain for cover, returning fire with disciplined precision, while the settlers provided supporting volleys that kept Voss's men pinned down. It was a standoff. Voss couldn't advance without exposing himself to Talon's warriors. Talon couldn't close the distance without taking casualties from Voss's elevated position. Both sides were dug in, trading shots that echoed like thunder through the canyon. Cade's group had the high ground behind Voss's position. They could end this in minutes. But as Cade raised his rifle, aiming at the nearest of Voss's men, Leora put a hand on his arm. Give them a chance to surrender, she said. Make them choose. That is what the treaty demands, justice, not revenge. She was right, and she was asking him to be better than his anger wanted him to be. Cade lowered his rifle and shouted down into the canyon, Benjamin Voss, you're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and you'll face trial. Keep fighting and you'll die here. The gunfire stopped. For a moment, the canyon was silent except for the wind and the sound of someone cursing viciously below. Then Voss's voice echoed up. Mercer, I should have known you'd be too much of a coward to finish this properly. This isn't about courage. It's about doing things right. You get a trial, same as anyone else. That's what the treaty says. Your precious treaty, Voss laughed, bitter and broken. You actually believe in it, don't you? Think you've changed something, built something that will last? Another laugh. I'll tell you what you've built, Mercer. A fantasy, a delusion. And when it collapses, when your savage friends remember what they really are and turn on you, I hope I'm alive to watch. Only one way to find out, Cade called back. Surrender. Face justice. Live long enough to see if you're right. Silence. Then the sound of weapons being thrown down, metal clattering on stone. One by one, Voss's men emerged with their hands raised. Talon's warriors moved in to secure them, binding their wrists with practiced efficiency. But Voss himself didn't appear. He is running, Swiftwater said, pointing. Sure enough, a figure was scrambling up the far side of the canyon, heading for the ridge. Cade didn't think. He just ran. Down the slope, across the canyon floor, up the opposite side with his lungs burning and his legs screaming. He could hear others following, Kyle, Quinn, Leora. But he didn't wait. Voss had spent months trying to destroy everything they'd built. Had murdered Leora's sister. Had almost killed a family in their home. This ended now. He crested the ridge just as Voss reached it from the other side. They stood facing each other across 20 feet of broken stone, both breathing hard, both armed. Voss looked terrible. His expensive clothes were torn and filthy. His face was gaunt, haunted, but his eyes still burned with that absolute conviction that he was right and the world was wrong. "You should have let me go," Voss said. "Can't do that." "Why? What difference does it make? I'm finished, ruined. Everything I built is gone. What more do you want?" "Justice, not revenge. Justice." Cade kept his rifle lowered, but ready. "You killed people, Voss. Destroyed lives. You don't get to just walk away from that. And what will your justice accomplish? Will it bring back the dead? Will it undo anything I've done?" Voss shook his head. "It's meaningless. A performance to make you feel better about yourselves. Maybe, but it's what we've got. It's how we prove we're different from you." The others arrived then. Kyle on one side, Quinn on the other, Leora and Swiftwater spreading out to cut off any escape route. Voss looked at each of them, his expression shifting from defiant to desperate. "I'll pay you," he said suddenly. "I still have money. Hidden accounts. Enough to make all of you rich. Just let me go." "No," Quinn said flatly. "You don't understand," Voss's voice cracked. "I can't. I won't spend 20 years in a cage. I'd rather die." He went for his gun. Multiple rifles came up, fingers tightened on triggers. One squeeze, and it would be over. Voss would be dead. The threat ended. Justice served in the oldest and simplest way. But Leora stepped forward, directly into the line of fire, and Voss froze. "You murdered my sister," she said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. "You killed her because she stood at the spring and refused to move, because she believed that one girl's courage could change minds, and you shot her like she was nothing. She was in the way. She was 14 years old," Leora's voice cracked, "and you took her from us because your profit mattered more than her life." Voss stared at her, and for just a moment something that might have been shame flickered across his face. I didn't order that. The foreman, You created the conditions. You made it clear that clan lives did not matter, that we were obstacles to be removed. And when she died, you sent money. $50. Like that made it acceptable." Leora's hands were shaking. "I have hated you every day since, dreamed of killing you, of making you suffer the way she suffered." Voss's hand was still on his gun. "Then do it. Pull the trigger. Prove you're no better than me." "No." Leora's voice was quiet now, certain. "I will not prove your point. I will not become what you think we are. You will face trial. You will be judged by a council of settlers and clans working together. You will see that the world you tried to destroy is stronger than your hatred." She paused. "And you will live knowing that in the end, your victims were better people than you ever were." For a long moment, Voss just stood there. Then slowly, he raised his hands. Quinn moved in to secure him, removing his weapons and binding his wrists. Voss didn't resist. He looked hollowed out, defeated in a way that went deeper than physical capture. They brought him back to Fort Preston in chains. Word of his capture spread fast, and by the time they arrived, a crowd had gathered. Some wanted immediate execution, others called for a quick trial and hanging. But the Treaty Council had already convened, and they made it clear Voss would face justice through the proper channels, exactly as the treaty demanded. The trial lasted a week. Evidence was presented, testimony from survivors, documents proving fraud and conspiracy, confessions from the captured men who'd worked for him. Voss's lawyers tried every defense they could think of, but the evidence was overwhelming and the council was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Sentence: life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Voss was taken away in chains, and this time there would be no escape. The territorial governor had personally guaranteed maximum security, knowing that another escape would destroy what little credibility the government still had in the territory. With Voss gone, the real work began. The trading post was rebuilt, larger than before, with living quarters designed to house visiting clan families. The protected sites were formalized with boundary markers and regular patrols from both sides. The Treaty Council met weekly, handling everything from water rights disputes to marriage contracts between settlers and clan members, and there were more of those than anyone had expected. Black Rook, true to Talon's decree, remained in exile. Occasionally, word would drift back that he'd tried to recruit followers from other territories, but without success. The treaty was proving its worth, and fewer people were willing to throw that away for the promise of renewed war. 6 months after Voss's trial, Leora discovered she was pregnant. The news hit Cade like a physical blow. He'd never thought about children, never imagined a future stable enough to bring a child into. But here it was, growing inside Leora, this tiny impossible promise of something that hadn't existed before. "Are you happy?" Leora asked, watching his face carefully. "Terrified," Cade admitted. "But yeah, happy." "Good. Because this child will grow up in 2 worlds. They will need parents who can teach them to bridge both, to be strong and gentle, to fight when necessary but build whenever possible." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "They will be our future, the living proof that this peace we built can last." The baby, a girl, was born the following spring at Silver Creek, in a cabin that overlooked the sacred spring. The birth was attended by both a clan midwife and a settler doctor, working together to ensure safe delivery. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, the first thing Cade noticed was her eyes, dark like her mother's, sharp and curious and utterly fearless. They named her Hope. It felt right. News of Hope's birth spread through the territory like wildfire. She became a symbol without anyone planning it, proof that the impossible was possible, that 2 peoples who'd spent 20 years killing each other could create something beautiful instead. Other children followed, not just Cade and Leora's, though they had 2 more over the next 5 years, but marriages between settlers and clan members that produced a generation of children who grew up speaking both languages, honoring both traditions, and seeing nothing strange about friends whose parents came from different worlds. The treaty evolved. What had started as a temporary truce became permanent law, ratified by the territorial government and recognized by the federal authorities. The protected sites expanded. Trade routes multiplied. A permanent council building was constructed in Fort Preston, designed in a style that blended settler and clan architecture, where representatives met monthly to address concerns and make decisions that affected everyone. There were still problems, still conflicts. A dispute over fishing rights nearly caused a major incident until cooler heads prevailed. A settler killed a clan hunter in a drunken fight, and only swift action by the Treaty Council prevented retaliation. But each time, the system held. Justice was served. Peace was maintained. Not perfect peace, not absence of conflict, but the kind of peace that came from people choosing, every single day, to work things out rather than reach for weapons. 10 years after that day in the desert when Cade had saved Kael's life, they stood together on the ridge overlooking Silver Creek. Below, the spring ran clear over white stones, just as Leora had described. Wildflowers carpeted the meadow in shades of purple and gold. Children played near the water, Hope leading a mixed group of settler and clan kids in some complicated game that involved a lot of running and shouting. Kael was married now himself to a settler woman from Copper Ridge. They had a son who was currently trying to convince Hope to let him join the game. Talon, grayer but still formidable, visited regularly to see his grandchildren and sat on the Treaty Council as an elder advisor. Elder Makara had passed 2 years ago, peacefully in her sleep. But before she died, she'd told Leora that the peace was the greatest achievement of her long life, that she'd seen her people survive when survival seemed impossible. And that was worth every compromise, every difficult choice, every moment of doubt. "Did you ever imagine it would work?" Kael asked, watching the children below. "When you saved me, when you decided to try this impossible thing, did you believe?" Cade thought about it. "No, I was too tired to believe in anything. I just knew I couldn't keep doing what I'd been doing, had to try something different, even if it failed." "And now?" Now I believe. Cade smiled. Took me long enough. But yeah, I believe we built something real, something that might actually last. My father says the same thing. He also says you are still very foolish. Probably true. They stood in comfortable silence, two men who'd become brothers through circumstance and choice, watching the future play out in the valley below. Leora joined them, carrying their youngest, a boy named River who was just learning to walk. She handed him to Cade and leaned against his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That your sister would have loved this, seeing what grew from the stand she took." "Yes, she would have." Leora's voice was soft. "And your brother. I think he would have been proud of you, of what you chose when you could have chosen hatred. Maybe, or maybe he'd still think I'm an idiot who trusted the wrong people." Cade kissed her temple. "But I'd tell him it was worth it. Every risk, every fear, every moment of wondering if we were building something real or just delaying the inevitable. Worth it." Below, Hope spotted them on the ridge and waved. Cade waved back, feeling something expand in his chest. Not quite happiness, because happiness felt too simple for something this complex, but maybe contentment. Maybe peace. The real kind that came from knowing you'd fought for something good, and won not through violence, but through the much harder work of building trust one day at a time. That evening, there was a gathering at Fort Preston. Not a formal meeting, just people coming together to share food and stories and the comfortable ease of community. Settlers and clan members mixed freely now, conversations flowing in both languages, children running between groups without anyone tracking which side they belonged to. Daniel Cross was there, still running his newspaper, though he'd trained a young clan woman to help with writing and editing. Marshall Quinn, retired now but still attending council meetings because old habits died hard. Swiftwater and her husband, who'd started a guide service leading mixed groups through the territories. Thomas, the young settler who'd lost his father in Voss's mines, now working as a mediator helping resolve disputes before they escalated. All of them bound together by what they'd survived and what they'd built. As the evening wore on and stars appeared overhead, Talon called for silence. When the crowd quieted, he stood. 10 years ago, my son nearly died in the desert. A stranger saved his life for no reason except that he was tired of killing. That single act of mercy changed everything. Talon's voice carried across the gathering. We are here tonight because of choices. Because enough of us chose to try instead of give up, to build instead of burn, to believe that our children deserved better than the world we inherited. He raised his cup. To the future, may it be kinder than the past. May our children know peace, and may we never forget how much it cost to get here. Everyone raised their drinks. The toast was repeated in both languages, voices overlapping in harmony. Cade didn't speak. Didn't need to. He simply stood there with Leora beside him, their children nearby, surrounded by people who'd become family, not through blood, but through shared struggle and shared hope. Later, when the gathering had dispersed and most people had gone home, Cade found himself alone on the porch of the house he and Leora had built at the edge of Fort Preston. It was a hybrid structure, clan-building techniques combined with settler materials, a physical representation of their blended lives. He thought about the man he'd been 10 years ago, hollow, angry, going through the motions of living without really being alive. That man had saved Kyle life without understanding why, had stumbled into peace without believing it was possible, had married Leora thinking he was too broken to deserve happiness. But here he was, alive in a way he hadn't been for years, connected to people and place and purpose, still broken in some ways. There were scars that would never fully heal, losses that would never stop hurting. But broken didn't mean destroyed. It just meant he'd survived things that should have killed him and come out different on the other side. The door opened behind him. Leora stepped out, wrapped in a blanket against the night chill. "You're thinking too much again," she said. "Occupational hazard." She settled beside him, and they sat in silence watching the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered. The eternal conversation of the frontier, older than any human conflict, continuing regardless of who lived or died or made peace. "Do you think it will last?" Leora asked quietly. "What we built. Will our grandchildren know it? Their children?" "I don't know," Cade admitted. Nothing lasts forever, but I think we gave it the best chance we could. Built it on truth instead of lies, on justice instead of revenge, on the radical idea that people who've been enemies can choose to be something else. That is all we can do. Give them the foundation. Let them build on it. Yeah. Cade pulled her closer. And trust that some of them will be as foolish as we were, willing to try impossible things just because the alternative is unacceptable. Leora laughed softly. Then I hope our children are very foolish indeed. They sat together as the night deepened, two people who'd survived impossible things and built impossible dreams and were still, against all odds, standing. The peace they'd created wasn't perfect, would never be perfect. There would always be challenges, setbacks, people who rejected it in favor of the old comfortable hatreds. But it was real. It was tested. It was proven capable of surviving the worst that both sides could throw at it. And that, Cade thought, was enough. Not everything, not permanent, but enough to make the trying worthwhile, enough to honor everyone who'd died before the peace, everyone who'd believed it was impossible, everyone who'd paid the price for hatred and fear and the inability to see another way. The desert didn't forgive mistakes, but sometimes, if you were very brave or very foolish or both, it gave you a chance to make different ones, to choose mercy over vengeance, to build instead of burn, to believe that the world, broken as it was, might still be worth fighting for. Cade had made that choice in a moment of exhaustion, kneeling beside a dying boy in the dust. He'd made it again and again in the years that followed, through trials and setbacks and moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. And he'd make it again tomorrow, and the day after. For as long as he had breath in his body and people he loved worth protecting, that was what peace required. Not grand gestures or perfect solutions, just the daily choice to keep trying, to keep building, to keep believing that what they'd created together, imperfect and fragile and infinitely precious, was worth defending. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, marking time on a scale that made individual lives seem vanishingly small. But down here, in this moment, with Leora warm against his side and their children sleeping safely inside, and the community they'd built still standing despite everything that had tried to destroy it, down here, Cade felt anything but small. He felt like part of something larger than himself, something that would outlast him, something that mattered. And that, in the end, was all anyone could hope for. To leave the world a little better than they'd found it. To give the next generation tools they could use to build something even better. To prove that change, real change, was possible if enough people were willing to be brave or foolish enough to try. The peace would survive. Cade was certain of that now, not because it was perfect or easy or guaranteed, but because they'd built it to bend instead of break, to adapt instead of shatter, to survive challenges both external and internal by constantly choosing to honor its principles even when easier paths beckoned. It was the kind of peace his brother would never see, that Leora's sister would never experience, that thousands of others had died without knowing was possible, but their children would know it, and their children's children. And maybe, generations from now, someone would tell the story of how it all began with a stranger who was too tired to kill one more time and made a different choice instead, a choice that changed everything. Cade held Leora close and watched the stars and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something that might actually be called peace. Not just the absence of war, not just the cessation of violence, but genuine peace. The kind that came from knowing you'd done the right thing even when it was hard. From seeing the fruits of impossible labor growing strong and real. From choosing, again and again and again, to build instead of burn. And that was how a war that had lasted 20 years ended, not with a grand battle or crushing victory, but with daily choices, small mercies, and the stubborn refusal of ordinary people to accept that hatred was the only option. The frontier had been brutal, unforgiving, built on blood and bones and broken promises. But it was changing, and Cade Mercer, the prospector who'd walked alone through the Red Basin for years, was no longer alone. He was home. He was loved. He was part of something worth fighting for. And the peace, hard-won and precious and infinitely fragile, would endure.